Support for Disrupted comes from the Connecticut Office of Film, Television, and Digital Media.
1963 changed the course of U.S. history. It included the assassinations of civil rights leader Medgar Evers and President John F. Kennedy.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
1963 was also the year of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his now iconic I Have a Dream speech on that day. And future Congressman John Lewis also spoke.
We march today for jobs and freedom, but we have nothing to be proud of. The hundreds and thousands of our brothers are not here, but they're receiving starvation wages or no wages at all.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're breaking down a pivotal year in the civil rights movement with Peniel E. Joseph. He's professor of history, Barbara Jordan Chair in Ethics and Political Values, and founding director of the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. His newest book is called Freedom Season: How 1963 Transformed America's Civil Rights Revolution. Professor, it's wonderful to have you on Disrupted.
Thank you for having me, Kalila.
I want to start actually with one of your titles at the University of Texas, which is the Barbara Jordan Chair in Ethics and Political Values. I think Barbara Jordan is often overlooked when we talk about that history of leaders, particularly legislative leaders. Who was Barbara Jordan, and what does it mean for you to hold that chair?
Oh, wow. Thank you. It means a lot. It's a huge honor. Barbara Jordan was from Houston, Texas. She was the first Black woman to be a Texas state representative after running twice, being defeated, but winning in 1966. And then she became the first Black woman to be a congresswoman in the House of Representatives from the state of Texas, winning the 1972 election and serving from 1973 to 1979. Very famously, Barbara Jordan was an ally with Lyndon Baines Johnson. President Johnson mentored her, and she was the first Black woman to give a keynote at a major party convention at the 1976 Democratic National Convention. And very famously, she was a star nationally for her service during the Watergate hearings. The supporter of voting rights, she co-sponsored the 1975 Voting Rights Act extension that placed Texas and other parts of the Southwest under the purview of the Voting Rights Act. So an enormous trailblazer who I agree is often underwritten and underrecognized, especially outside of Texas, for her enormous contributions to the struggle for civil rights and human rights.
Thank you for answering that question, because I think it really captures so much of what your work is about, of reclaiming that historical record, of helping us to understand context and really nuance. Because I think often the popular understanding is that these things just happen, as if people wake up one day and say, you know, the way we've always done this is wrong. Let's do something different. But to understand that legacy of Barbara Jordan, the lineage of people that you write about in your work, I really think it brings us full circle. You are the founding director of the Study of Race and Democracy. And in that line of Barbara Jordan, people often don't see the connection. What for you as founding director, as a scholar of this, is why we need to think about race and democracy in tandem with one another.
Oh, absolutely. So what's so extraordinary about the American democratic experiment, Kalila, is the way in which because of the Civil War and Reconstruction and Black folks' role in self-emancipating themselves, we become a multiracial democracy in the aftermath of the Civil War. But because of the counter-revolution and the counter-revolution of white supremacy and racial terror, that multiracial democracy does not win in the late 19th century. In fact, there becomes really decades, which the historian Rayford Logan calls our nadir of racial pogroms, racist attacks. Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 is just the tip of the iceberg. Paradoxically, in the 1960s, we win the narrative war. The only reason why we have Michelle and Barack Obama and Oprah Winfrey is not because of them and their brilliance and their genius, because we've always had people like that. There were people just as smart as Michelle Obama and Barack Obama in the 19th century, in the 18th century. We've always had that. But they're able to gain access to citizenship because of what happened in 1963 and because of the Fannie Lou Hamers and the Gloria Richardsons and the Lorraine Hansberrys, but also Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., James Baldwin, Medgar Evers, Murray Evers. So race and democracy are inextricably linked. You cannot talk about American democracy without talking about race, because the original sin of the United States of America is racial slavery and its afterlife.
You mentioned James Baldwin, and the epigraph of your newest book, Freedom Season, is a quote by James Baldwin. And I want to share that with our listeners. Baldwin writes, "Once I was able to define my role as distinguished from my place in the extraordinary drama that is America, I was released from the illusion that I hated America." Talk to us about that quote and why you chose it to start your book.
Baldwin is one of the key interlocutors here in Freedom Season, and I actually am working on another Baldwin project right now. And so I think Baldwin is this amazing mind and voice and filled with so much genius. But I wanted us to understand that Baldwin has a profound critique of America, but also profound love for the country because of the ancestral brilliance that he's a part of. And that's what, there's another quote that he says when he's on tour in the West Coast, that he spent his whole life running away from his ancestors until he realized that they were the key to his survival and his flourishing, right? And so when he says, once I was able to understand and distinguish my role from my place. This is where, in Notes of a Native Son, going back to 1955, he talked about birthright versus inheritance, and this idea that on one hand, there was a birthright of having access to the American dream, and all Americans had that. And on the other hand, Black people had this inheritance of being non-citizens and being marginalized and being demonized and being dehumanized. So what he's getting at with the whole notion of the role from place is, once he was able to gain his own agency, and he gains that agency through history, through studying history and realizing that those enslaved Africans mean everything. And they aren't anything to be ashamed of, but quite the opposite, that you need to embrace them. And that through that embrace, you're going to find a moral and political and artistic framework to thrive and to flourish and to transform. And so Baldwin, I think a lot of people, including scholars, don't understand Baldwin and don't understand The Fire Next Time. And I think as a historian, what was really great, the privilege is, and you were saying this earlier, Kalila, is context. So once you provide a context for everything Baldwin is doing and saying in 63, and I start with Baldwin in 1962 at Howard University, you're better able to understand that, he's not naive. He's actually very confrontational. He's very passionate. But Baldwin realizes that unless we stop lying to each other, all the policies and the laws and the legislations in the world won't work. They won't last, because there's this confrontation over the past that has to happen in order to transform the present and the future. And that's what Baldwin is leading those conversations that entire year.
Your book is a breakthrough for a number of reasons, but at its core, it focuses on 1963. when so many people writing about the civil rights era focus on 65, where we got the Voting Rights Act, the Bloody Sunday March, and the ways that it opened eyes for people across the country. Maybe some people talk about 64 with the Civil Rights Act, because then they can venerate JFK and LBJ and that sort of lineage of presidential leadership. Why focus on 1963 is the first question. And two, why do you think 63 is often overlooked for those later years?
Well, I focused on 1963 because 63 is our Breonna Taylor, George Floyd moment before those things happened. So 63 is the year of, you know, hundreds and thousands of demonstrations across the United States, tens of thousands of people getting disrupted. And this is across the entire country. So just like when we think about that George Floyd moment, 63 is that moment for us. And 63 was the moment where this idea of Black dignity and citizenship becomes supercharged, where the bottom up, the grassroots really forced President Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, to confront these things. But 63 is also a time of change and transformation. So you've got Gloria Richardson from Cambridge, Maryland, who's leading an extremely militant movement to desegregate the city of Cambridge, Maryland, and really is unapologetically Black, Howard University graduate, single mother of two Black young women, and somebody who pushes and challenges the Kennedys, unimpressed by them, pushes and challenges Bobby Kennedy, somebody who Malcolm X leads a standing ovation for Gloria Richardson at King Solomon Baptist Church in Detroit in November of 1963, and they become good friends. So I wanted to show those things. Lorraine Hansberry, who really serves as a mentor and friend to James Baldwin, radical international Black feminist and Marxist, not just the author of Raisin in the Sun and LeBlanc and The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window, queer, a genius, somebody who's at that Kennedy meeting, but somebody whose politics were much more radical than Baldwin's earlier. I wanted to show James Baldwin in Mississippi at the start of the year with Medgar Evers, and driving through Mississippi is what gives him the inspiration for A Blues for Mr. Charlie, which comes out the next year. I wanted to show Malcolm X in Rochester, New York, leading protests against police brutality, and for us to see his evolution that year. I wanted us to see King and the measure of doubt that King had in 63, and to see his evolution and how he goes from, just religious meetings in Chicago to jail cell Easter Sunday. So 63 gives us a chance to see all those things. And I think the reason why most scholars have not focused on that year is because of how you remarked, Kalila. 64, 65, 68 give you better signposts, or at least easier signposts. You've got the Civil Rights Acts of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, Selma, Freedom Summer. And by 68, I like to say, Kalila, 68 is the MCU of the 1960s. It's the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Because 68 is filled with comic book heroes. People talk about Kennedy, King, Poor People's Campaign, the Black Panthers, Black Student Union, Angela Davis, Kathleen Cleaver, Eldridge Cleaver, Huey Newton, Stokely Carmichael. It's just there. There's anti-war protests. So I get why people are that excited about it, but there is no 68 without 63, and I wanted to really show that.
Coming up, more with Professor Peniel E. Joseph. He talks about his belief that the events of 1963 made his life and career in academia possible.
And what 63 does, Kalila, is really, it sets up a 50-year racial justice consensus that ends with the Shelby v. Holder, the racist Supreme Court decision.
This is Disrupted. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown Dean. This hour, we're talking about the impact of 1963 and the movement for civil rights. We're still joined by historian Peniel E. Joseph. He's author of Freedom Season, How 1963 Transformed America's Civil Rights Revolution. One of the key moments of 1963 happened in Birmingham, Alabama. After the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested for protesting segregation, he wrote a letter known as Letter from Birmingham Jail. In the letter, King lays out some of the justifications behind nonviolent protest. Ask Professor Joseph to tell us more about the letter.
Well, Letter from Birmingham Jail is King's break with the reformers. It's King's break with white liberals. In that letter, he excoriates white liberals. He calls white liberals cowards. He says that they are not courageous. He says that they stand for immoral things, and he will no longer stand for immoral things. So in Letter from Birmingham Jail, he says he's never, ever going to obey segregationist laws moving forward. That's extraordinary because that is the law of the land. But then King very brilliantly politically says that the young people who are being arrested in Birmingham are one day in the future going to be remembered and galvanized as heroes, as heroes. And he says for bringing the nation back to those great wells of democracy dug deep by the founding fathers. So King does a rhetorical sleight of hand by connecting the civil rights demonstrations in Birmingham to the American Revolution, the most patriotic part of the nation's history, right? So King does a lot of different things where I think through Freedom Season, you see the kind of brilliant actor he is, where he's not confrontational. So people like Roy Wilkins and others stand out in meetings with President Kennedy much more than King. But what King does after, for example, the June 22nd meeting at the White House is tell the reporters, hey, I had basically a one-on-one with President Kennedy, and I told him we're going to continue to march, right? And so King is a very, very adept and deft political actor. And King pushes back against Malcolm X too. In Los Angeles, King says that it's only the courageous men and women who can do nonviolence. The cowards can't do it. This requires discipline and it requires a kind of bravery that is extraordinary because we have faith and we're believers. He's talking about Malcolm X. So I think it disabuses us from this idea that the day to day was not very, very fraught, was not very confrontational within the movement. One other anecdote, Kalila, is Gloria Richardson and Diane Nash at the White House, where Diane Nash is one of the key leaders in SCLC and SNCC, a lot of times overlooked because her husband was Jim Bevel. And Diane Nash is one of the architects of the voting rights campaign in Selma, one of the architects of the Nashville movement in 1961. So an extraordinary civil rights activist. But Nash and Gloria Richardson are at the White House, and there's a women's meeting at the White House. And Gloria Richardson is telling reporters, I'm not impressed. I don't want to just shake President Kennedy's hands. We have to have strategies and tactics over how do we transform racial injustice in the United States in a concrete way. And these folks aren't taking it seriously enough. It lets us see how Black women not being allowed to talk at the March on Washington, give a significant speech, was such a huge blow, and lets us see that they were pushing to gain access. Just in that historical context, they were not allowed to because the patriarchy was so thick and so robust, even within Black male denizens, that they weren't. But to see her, to see Lorraine Hansberry, and to see the activism that they did do, you could see second wave Black feminism, which is already there, but going to be coming to the head with the Third World Women's Alliance, with National Black Feminist Organization, with the Combee River Collective. You can see all those things coming to the fore in 1963. in ways that I wanted to show for the reader.
One of the things that I appreciate about your book is that it is a reminder of the danger of not getting the historical record accurate. A few years ago, I remember being very upset. I saw a student in my class came to class with a t-shirt that said, "I am not my ancestors." And I was livid. And this was a class on, like, I don't know, introduction to American politics or something. So I take the student aside at the end of class and I say, explain this t-shirt to me. I'm not my ancestors. I won't stand by and let people say things and do things. They just went along with it. They were just happy to be there. And I remember taking this student and bringing them to my office to say, let me show you Fannie Lou Hamer. I want you to listen to her words. This is a woman who was beaten, left for dead. You're not that? And it was not an attack on the student, but an attack on what's happened when we have not told history in its fullness, in its completeness, in its ugliness. And when we do this kind of hero worship that only puts forth certain people without understanding what it took for Martin Luther King to make that statement in Birmingham, right? In a place that was known as Bombingham because of the severe ways that violence was used to keep people in place. What it takes for even a Harry Belafonte, who had so much to lose as an artist and an entertainer, to say, it's not enough for me to just make music. I'm going to fund the movement, even if you don't know that I'm the person doing that. As you're writing about history, you're bringing this nuance in this context. Are you also thinking about what it means for our awareness today? So whether it's a deeper appreciation for that history and that record, or is it more about let's get the record complete in the time that it was there? How do you see that link between then and now?
Oh, Kalila, I think what you said was very eloquent and beautiful. And I think a great example for me, I'll give two examples. One is repeatedly writing down the names of the six children who were murdered in Birmingham, September 15th, 1963. So it's Carol Robertson, Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Denise McNair are the four girls at the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, but also it's Johnny Robinson, who's murdered by police. And also it's Virgil Peanut Ware, 13 years old, who's murdered by white teens who do 6 months in juvenile detention for his murder. One does 6 months, the other nothing. And so I wanted us to get that understanding in the contemporary in a huge way, because the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing is a huge turning point in American history. I wanted us to see that, and I wanted us to see the March on Washington as something that was very complicated, something that did have joy, and I, as somebody who's a scholar of Malcolm X, I wanted us to see Malcolm's critique, but also to see that Malcolm attended the March on Washington and wanted to be part of this fervent. And I wanted us to see the Howard Zinns at the March on Washington. I wanted us to see, when we look at the first half of the book, Medgar Evers and his activism, and Myrlie Evers, their activism before his assassination, and Medgar Evers' huge speech in May of 1963, where he brings the Pan-African and the anti-colonial and the global and the Black sharecroppers all together, and to see sort of the brilliance and genius of Medgar Evers and his wife Myrlie Evers Williams, now who are these huge steadfast activists in Mississippi and vow never to leave Mississippi under the threat of death. So it's important for us to understand the triumphs and the joy alongside of the agonies and the deaths. And I want us in a contemporary way to remember those children's names and to remember the coalitions and the organizing that we had to do to get those breakthroughs, and how we really reimagined and redefined freedom, citizenship, dignity, democracy for all people. And what 63 does, Kalila, is really, it sets up a 50-year racial justice consensus that ends with the Shelby v. Holder the racist Supreme Court decision that circumvents the Civil Rights Act and Section 5 preclearance of the Voting Rights Act. I wanted us to see the hard work that was done because that 50-year period, for all its faults and flaws and mass incarceration and racism and segregation, that's what provides all of us, including us, the context to become faculty, to become professors and writers. It provides Black people and women of color, people who are disabled, queer people, with the most access to build wealth, to buy a house, to be in corporate America, to be in higher education in K through 12, to be elected officials, to create churches and social groups and be in fraternities and sororities in the history of the Republic. It's an imperfect consensus. Martin Luther King Jr., in the very famous speech, Drum Major, talks about how he wants to mold consensus and not just take easy consensus. So that's what happened. We molded a consensus, and people fought us every single step along the way, including affirmative action, including voting rights. We tried to stop gerrymandering. We created the Congressional Black Caucus, which inspired the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Black women were co-architects of this whole transformative, cutting-edge, multiracial democracy. But people still tried to assassinate and marginalize and demonize and dehumanize us all along the way, right? And right now, we're living in a post-consensus America, post-2013. And that's why you have the overt racism of the Jim Crow era, which is back with a vengeance. So what Michelle Alexander called the new Jim Crow is about more than just mass incarceration. It's the whole aperture. It's the whole ball game, right? And I wanted us to see how in 1963 we were not interested in safe spaces as Black people. We were not interested in saying we weren't ready for the fight. We were ready for the fight. We were armed intellectually, some of us literally to defend ourselves and defend our lives. Medgar Evers had a rifle with him traveling through Mississippi, but we were armed intellectually and emotionally. And when you see Black people not being able to give water and food to people online to try to register to vote in 1963, those scenes happen in Texas now. Those scenes happen, and I wanted people to see those echoes and what's going on.
Coming up, more with Professor Peniel E. Joseph. He talks about what it is about 1963 that inspires him today.
I understand why people are so heartbroken over this time. It also gives us a picture of how do we come together after almost falling apart, right? So the country unraveled and remade itself in 63, and Black people were the key to that.
This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking about 1963 and how that year shaped U.S. history. Peniel E. Joseph is professor of public affairs and author of Freedom Season, How 1963 Transformed America's Civil Rights Revolution. Today, we find ourselves in a moment where some key pieces of legislation of the civil rights movement in the 1960s have been rolled back. On June 25th, 2013, the Supreme Court decision in Shelby County v. Holder declared a central section of the Voting Rights Act unconstitutional. Ask Professor Joseph how he responds to people who question the value of 1963, especially given that so many Americans are losing protections that the civil rights movement secured.
Well, it matters because of this idea of Black dignity and citizenship providing universal access for multiracial democracy and freedom for all people, right? And so the charge, the anti-DEI, anti-woke, anti-affirmative action, the assaults on Roe v. Wade and reproductive rights, those impact Black women more than white women. And that's why Black women created reproductive justice movement, right? So all of this matters. Anything you think about race, class, gender, sexuality, Black people empirically are impacted negatively more than any single group in the United States. And that's stemming from the structure of exploitative capitalism, extractive capitalism, racism, deep misogyny and misogynoir, patriarchy, and a system of violent white supremacy that remains sacrosanct in the Republic. So it absolutely matters. And I think 63 shows us there was a time we were able to so dramatically, Kalila, ameliorate things that certain people thought we would never have to face these struggles again, right? I'm Generation X. We grew up in a context that was not as fulsome as those who are 10 and 12 years older than us. Those are the Barack Obamas, able to get to Harvard, Yale, all this stuff. They empirically actually had the best window. But we did grow up in a time where we were able to see a Black president, a Black first lady. We were able to see the Michael Jordans, the LeBron James. We were able to see South Africa become free, Trans Africa, and Winnie Mandela and Nelson Mandela. We were able to see that. Um, Now we're in an era of overt racism and white supremacy where we see the consensus that allowed us access, including the Black billionaires and millionaires, but including scholars at elite Ivy universities, public universities. That consensus is not there. So they want to and are actively seeking to remove us, to fire us, to marginalize us, to strip us from our wealth, of our wealth and our citizenship. So it really matters. And right now, what Malcolm X had done really matters more than ever because Malcolm was Black America's prosecuting attorney and prosecuting America for a series of crimes against Black humanity. And Malcolm always thought dignity was the ball game. And until his last year, really felt that citizenship, since it was merely the external recognition of your God given dignity, was not something to achieve until that last year because he never trusted America's institutions to permanently recognize Black dignity or citizenship. Now, I've talked to students about this. How would you feel about Malcolm X's perspective the day Barack Obama was elected, right? People pushed back 2008, November, Grant Park, everybody's saying, no, we're good to go. We've overcome, right? How do you feel about it now? How do you feel about it now? So it's important for us to remember that all of this absolutely matters because what we're trying to achieve is freedom. And the Black freedom struggle has always been about trying to achieve freedom, not just for Black people, but for the most expansive, inclusive definition of freedom as possible. And that's where Black women have been hugely important. Yet at the same time, and this connects to James Baldwin's big lie about slavery, there's this big lie about Black women somehow disfiguring the movement and Black women somehow emasculating Black men and Black women somehow doing all the things that they didn't do. And instead of being congratulated for being these co-architects of this freedom struggle, being demonized and dehumanized. So all these things are happening all at once. And 63 provides us a context to understand and lessons for how we should be thinking now and the real coalition politics we should be utilizing in order to gain that recognition of dignity and citizenship for Black people and for all people.
That emphasis on dignity and citizenship for Black people and all people is why 63 also inspires resistance across the globe of other people looking to what was happening in the United States, to looking at the ways that Black people, yes, were organizing for themselves, but as you say, a more expansive vision, not just of democracy, but of humanity. And that global art continues the legacy, helps us to see the impact that people can have. And I think, Professor, sometimes because time seems so overwhelming, when the obstacles seem so overwhelming, people will talk themselves out of their power and assume they have no power or that the problem is too big and intractable. I appreciate that your book reminds us that yes, we have power. Yes, we have capacity. And if we didn't have it, people wouldn't be working so hard to undermine it. There would not be a question about birthright citizenship or importing people from South Africa if people right here, right now, didn't have the ability to say no and no longer. My last question to you, and I hate that we have to bring this to a close, but I know you have other things you have to do. My last question to you is, given what you know about 1963, given what you know about the arc of history and leadership, what inspires you or gives you hope as you think about the path forward and the way forward? What are you drawing on?
Well, I think I'm drawing on that ancestral brilliance and the way in which these Black folks, Gloria Richardson, James Baldwin, Malcolm and Martin, Diane Nash, Lorraine Hansberry were such huge change agents, and they had steadfast faith, even though sometimes they became depressed, they became sad. They had real faith and they had real belief in an aspirational vision of America and multiracial democracy. James Baldwin ends The Fire Next Time saying that we can finally end the racial nightmare and achieve our country. And what's so interesting is he's talking about an aspirational republic where we recognize each other as estranged kin and family, and you care about other people's children as much as you care about your own. And that's why Jimmy Baldwin was so angry about those 6 children who were murdered in Birmingham, and leads demonstrations and all kinds of things that we see in part 4, Autumn, of the book. So I'm an optimist, and I think I'm an optimist because of the work. And so we have lessons here to do coalition politics. We have lessons where we should be interested in each other's pain. So Black men should be interested in Black women's pain and vice versa. We should be interested, those of us who are straight, in what's going on with queer folks in our community, uh, 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 LGBTQIA in our community. Those of us who are able-bodied should be interested in those who have disability. And those of us who have citizenship papers should be interested in the pain of those who are undocumented, and those who are Muslims and Palestinians and Jews, and those who are Christians. So the whole gamut. And that's what I think 63 teaches us. So in that sense, even though I understand why people are so heartbroken over this time, it also gives us a picture of how do we come together after almost falling apart, right? So the country unraveled and remade itself in 63, and Black people were the key to that, and Baldwin talks about it. We were the key. The country mourned the deaths of the Black children separately, but they mourned Kennedy collectively. And Jimmy Baldwin excoriates the country for that. And he connects Kennedy's death as a martyr of the Second Reconstruction alongside of Medgar Evers and those 6 children, right? And so we have to remember, as you were saying, Kalila, our own power. And that's what gives me hope, because we are extraordinarily powerful. And again, 63 shows us there was a time where we won the narrative war. We win the narrative war. And that narrative war, that's how we get Toni Morrison. That's how we get Alice Walker. That's how we get, Nicole Hannah Jones. That's how we get the Ibram Kendis and Ta-Nehisi Coates and so many different others. And so that excites me. And I think that we can do that again. And so many of us are beginning to do that again. And thought leaders like yourself in the public square and the public arena, besides being at university, is crucially important, because these narratives are how we shape our reality and future. And the only reason we were able to win that narrative war was people were able to sacrifice and debate and work that hard. And they didn't always get what they wanted. Like those of us were recipients of people wanting even more. Black studies wasn't supposed to be the ball game, yet many of us have gotten health care and whole lives because of Black studies, right? Our kids go to school because of Black studies. We take vacations because of Black studies and can do research because of Black studies. So we have to understand that we're the recipients of all that. So we have to do the work. We have to do the work. And that gives me courage and gives me optimism and gives me hope.
The idea that hope is rooted in appreciation and gratitude, but also a willingness to see what your role is in that. And we're grateful that you answer that call every day with the work that you do in the classroom and beyond. Peniel E. Joseph is Professor of Public Affairs, Barbara Jordan Chair in Ethics and Political Values, and founding director of the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy at the University of Texas at Austin. His newest book is Freedom Season: How 1963 Transformed America's Civil Rights Revolution. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Kalila, and thank you for the work that you do every day. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Disrupted is produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Robin Doyon Aiken, and Meg Fitzgerald. Our interns are Coco Cooley and Isaac Moss. You can listen to all the previous episodes of Disrupted by finding us wherever you get your podcast. And you can listen for new episodes every Friday at 9 a.m. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Thanks for listening.